Welcome, everybody, and thanks for attending. My name is Dr. Julie Berg. I'm a senior lecturer in criminology here at the University of Glasgow, and I'm also the director of the Scottish Centre for Crime and Justice Research. And welcome to our first of a series of webinars that we're holding entitled Security and Justice Futures. And as the name suggests, we're seeking to confront the dilemmas, the reimaginings, and the futures of security and justice. And we're looking at this from a cross-regional perspective. So most of our future webinars, and this one today as well, include northern and southern perspectives. And we also seek to engage academic and practitioner audiences as well, so we can have sort of a dialogue on the challenges facing both contexts. And so these webinars are a joint initiative, and we work in collaboration, the Scottish Centre for Crime and Justice Research with the National Crime Research Centre in Kenya, the Global Risk Governance Programme at the Faculty of Law, University of Cape Town, as well as the Institute for Development Studies at the University of Nairobi. So our first webinar today, this afternoon, here in UK at least, it's in the afternoon, is entitled, Who Should the Police Be in the 21st Century? And we consider, both speakers consider the challenges and the future directions for the police or policing in diverse contexts and faced with new and emerging what we call harmscapes or harm landscapes. So before I introduce the speakers, I would like to ask that during the presentations, you could just switch your videos off. But of course, you can put your videos on again when we have our discussions. There's also a chat room option available if you'd like to ask questions there, but I'd ask you to also hold off any questions until the end of the two speakers have spoken. But you're welcome to, of course, put in some comments in the chat box. And so first, I'd like to introduce our two speakers. Our first speaker today is Dr. Mutuma Ruteere. He's the Director and CEO of the National Crime Research Centre, which is Kenya's state agency on crime research. Previously, he served as the founding director of the Centre for Human Rights and Policy Studies, also based in Kenya. And he has served as a member of the Presidential Task Force on Police, Prisons and National Youth Service Reforms in Kenya from 2022 to 2023. And he also served as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia and Related Tolerance from 2011 to 2017. So Mutuma would be our first speaker. But I'll also introduce our second speakers along so that they can just follow each other. Our second speaker is Professor Jennifer Wood. She's a professor of criminal justice and the vice provost for faculty affairs at Temple University in Philadelphia in the USA. She earned a bachelor's degree in criminology at the University of Ottawa and received an MA and PhD in criminology from the University of Toronto. Jennifer is a criminologist. She has expertise in policing and regulation. Her research focuses on the intersections between policing and public health and how police officers, for instance, intervene with people experiencing health vulnerabilities such as mental illness. And Jane is also the North American editor for Policing and Society. So I know we don't have a lot of time, so I will stop talking there and I will invite our first speaker, Mutuma, to speak, and each speaker will speak for about 15 minutes and then we'll have some time at the end for questions. So again, please keep muted and keep your videos off just until the speakers have spoken. Thank you. Over to you, Mutuma.
Thank you, Julie, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone, wherever you are. My apologies if you hear some noise. I'm somewhere outside, and alert me if you can't hear me. So this afternoon, it's afternoon here, I want to speak about dilemmas of policing in Africa. And let me begin by pointing out that most of my comments are actually on policing, will be about public policing. And of course, we all know that there's much more to policing than public policing. The choice of my topic is a little bit hubristic, one might say, as it proposed to speak on policing across a continent of 54 states. Obviously, it's a feat that is not feasible in one presentation, and even less so one that lasts a few minutes. So what I intend to do really in these few minutes is to present some observations on policing in Africa in an attempt to provoke reflection and discussion. There's been considerable attention that has been given to issues of policing reforms in Africa, specifically transformation of public police, critiques of their performance and deficits, accountability gaps and disconnect. Most recently, there's an Afrobarometer study. This is a survey across Africa that seeks to ask African citizens the trust they have in policing, and that has revealed some very interesting patterns. At the policy level, a lot of work has gone into technical reform, search for public policing models. But however, at this point, I would say that in the police practice reforms community, there is a growing fatigue and some disillusionment. One might even say some pessimism with respect to the reforms enterprise. This is evident in declining programs on police reforms across various countries. A lot of investment, of course, was previously linked to post-conflict security sector reforms, processes, and transitional justice initiatives of the post-1990s political reforms in Africa. The period of relative peace in many parts of the continent with the end of major civil wars has meant a return to everyday kind of policing, which is a subject that is not always interesting, particularly from an external or international perspective. Recently, with the proliferation of the threat of terrorism and its transnational implications, we have seen a bit of spike in interest on policing, although a lot of focus against that aspect of policing has been on militarization and more focus on militarism. So I want to suggest that a broad scan of policing research and practicing in Africa has to contend with three key dilemmas in the 21st century. First, and probably most critically, is where to find new ideas about policing. For most African countries, there are few or no institutions actually dedicated to the search for new ideas and framework for policing. Appreciably, of course, there's a growing body of research on policing scattered in some departments and among a few scholars in Africa and beyond. However, these are few and in between. Even fewer, if any, are centers or institutions dedicated to the study of policing, drawing from practice and African context. Neither are there good examples of police colleges or institutions dedicated to the standard research on policing beyond the academies that actually train recruits for careers as police officers. As a result, policing practice and theorization do not often meet, and police practice continues to skate on a thin layer of theoretical ice, to coin an inelegant expression. Where the scholarship exists in its current form, the preponderance of it is dedicated to technical aspects of policing with very limited interest on foundational concerns on the idea and the project of policing. Policing is often taken as a given, and routine practices trump reflection. Partly for that reason, policing in many instances remains rooted in outdated logics and practices. The decolonization debate that has come to policing in many parts of the Western world in the last few years may sound like it's over 60 years late in many African countries. The reality, of course, is that it remains as relevant today as it was in the first few years of independence. The key questions then are who is thinking about policing in Africa in the 21st century? Where can police practitioners find good ideas on policing in Africa? These are not trivial academic questions. In reform discussions, one of the key challenges that policymakers often pose is where else in Africa is this kind of thinking and practice found? So those interested in the project of policing, therefore, will see why finding good ideas that come with an African flavor is strategically important for change and transformation. The second concern is what the shift in the nature of governance means for policing in Africa. Internally and externally, the African nation state, like many other states, is undergoing important changes in governance, pluralism in actors, shifts in the conceptualization of sovereignty. And of course, for many years, it's been noted that pluralization of policing is not new in Africa. The paradox, though, is that non-public policing continues to labor under the shadow of informality in many cases. The fact that many African states continue to struggle with the project of nation and state building also means that acceptability of that pluralization remains highly contested. Nevertheless, we've seen some changes, increased mobility of people across the borders, not new, multiple citizenship. So in a sense, Africa is moving away from the notion of restricted movements, accepting multiple citizenship, all of them which pose new challenges and questions about policing of people, resources, as well as borders. The recent debate in in conservation circles in Kenya and Tanzania after the killing of an elephant that migrated from Kenya to Tanzania really illustrates this notion of how do we police resources as well as the environment in the 21st century in Africa. The third and the final issue that I want to pose on dilemma is, what will the technological revolutions mean for African policing? If the Industrial Revolution in Europe defined modern policing, how will policing change and transform the fourth Industrial Revolution for Africa? There's been a lot of discussion on artificial intelligence, for instance, and its potential in policing. Many key and relevant questions about risks that come with the deployment of AI tools. But for many African sites of policing, these technologies are often deployed as finished products developed for other markets, but now available for use. Moreover, and even more fundamentally, is the fact that AI tools depend on big data. Those who stand to take a full advantage of these important technologies are those who have invested in good data collection, analysis, and production. The data landscape across Africa, save for a few spots, is poor. The extent to which African policing therefore can take full advantage of these technologies remains quite uncertain. So the conversations we are holding here really are meant to provoke more interest in research and practice in policing in general. And the fact really that we are holding this webinar across continents, for me, presents the potential opportunities for greater collaboration and cooperation. I want to thank the various institutions involved in this convening and the moderator for this session, Julie Berg. Thank you, and back to you, Julie.
Thank you, Mutuma. I just love the fact that you said the decolonization of the police is 60 years late in Africa, and so many other excellent points made about governance, meanings of governments. Are African police forces able to take advantage of technological advances? And given the fact that policing is generally outdated and working on kind of logics and practices of colonial times, I would say. So thank you so much. That's a very, very, very good, helpful talk to set kind of the debate. So I will now hand over to Jen. Jen, I believe you've got some slides to share.
Thank you so much. Okay, you should see a full screen. If not, please speak up. Thank you so much for this invitation. And I want to first say that what I'll talk about briefly has been deeply inspired by the work of Julie Berg and Clifford Shearing and their work on harmscapes. This is a piece of work that Monique Marks from Durban, South Africa, and I have been working on, and I look forward to the conversation. Would like to just start off just by outlining the argument that Monique and I have developed. And what we argue is that public safety and public health are deeply connected. We see that this was starkly revealed during COVID-19, where policing systems were mobilized to address the pandemic's widespread destruction. Policing systems have long functioned as health intervention systems, responding to harms such as violence, substance misuse, and mental distress. These harms are connected and exacerbated by the meta harmscape of climate change, to draw from Julie and Clifford's terminology. So Monique and I have developed a paper that seeks to reimagine the policing function in this context, given the growing interconnectedness of health harms and climate harms. And it reconceptualizes policing as a nodal and regenerative function, where the police are seen as stimulating the interconnected growth of systems that promote human and planetary health. Police are harm interventionists. I've previously written about police as incidental health interventionists, but they are harm interventionists. And we see this in the everyday work of policing. I'm focusing on public policing, but of course I have a much broader nodal plural lens as well. We see police intervening in individual health-related vulnerabilities, such as substance use, mental distress, gun violence. And these everyday harms can occur as syndemics, co-occurring appearing disproportionately and excluded in marginalized communities. And syndemics have unique manifestations in different places around the world. They form what some call local syndemic assemblages, which together produce harms that are combined combinatory harms. Police function in these harmful landscapes produced by these syndemic assemblages. I would also note that much work has been written on police as harmful as well, as policing as a harmful intervention, as iatrogenic, to borrow the medical term, where the purported cure ends up producing more harms, both intended and unintended, through access to coercion and punishment. So Monique and I, drawing from different literatures, try to make the case for a consciousness of interconnection. We examine this idea of interconnectedness through two lenses or two portals: COVID-19 and mental health distress. I'll just speak briefly of each. Obviously, COVID-19, although it may have felt like a rare event, it has haunting parallels with the 1918 influenza epidemic. In both of these pandemics, the police were required to marshal public health capabilities, enforcing quarantines, managing traffic through public and private places in order to disrupt disease transmission. Mental health or mental distress is another global health crisis with implications for the police function. According to the World Health Organization, mental health is a state of well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, to realize their abilities to learn well, work well, and contribute to their communities. While an estimated 1 billion people across the world live with a diagnosable mental health condition, access to mental health care remains particularly challenging in many countries throughout the world. This health intervention function of policing, especially around mental health distress and the regulation of substance use, but more recently COVID-19, recognizes the interconnections between health harms and policing. But the literature on health harms and climate harms is much less developed. So we took inspiration from Julie and Clifford and their concept of harmscapes to develop this idea of different layered harmscapes on top of one another, harmscapes that defy spatial boundaries. And climate change can be understood as a global harmscape within public health. It has impacts on the public sphere, and it has impacts for the future of the policing function. The destruction of the natural environment has brought an upsurge of mental health and psychic disorders, and we developed this idea that climate change has direct effects on mental health and physical effects, both directly but also indirectly. Exposure to climate change hazards such as extreme heat, flooding, droughts, wildfires can affect mental health through various exposure pathways such as air pollution, food insecurity, conflict, forced migration, and the deepening of inequalities. The destruction of the natural environment has also brought an upsurge of mental health and psychic disorders. Exposure to climate change hazards such as extreme heat, flooding, or droughts can affect mental health in all of these unintended ways that researchers are beginning to understand and develop new concepts to help us understand this. For example, climate change has generated widespread feelings of anxiety about the potential scope of the anticipated impacts of climate change and the uncertainty of their nature and impact. New terms have been developed, such as eco-anxiety or climate anxiety. Experts have also developed notions of ecological grief or solastalgia that refer to the loss of solace otherwise gained from natural spaces, because our natural spaces have been affected by climate change. So the decline in planetary health stands to worsen public health harms and to generate novel syndemics. and novel syndemic assemblages through which policing are performing their functions. So we cannot expect the police as currently structured to address these emerging syndemics effectively. So we begin to reflect on how to reimagine the police idea. As currently structured, policing can't keep up with these emerging harms. So could policing be reimagined with a consciousness of interconnection? And what we argue that the challenge ahead rests in locating police within assemblages of institutions that contribute to the resilience of our environments and our ecological systems. This is very formative developmental work. And to start this, we reflect in our paper on design principles, or principles for a regenerative model of the policing function. To date, literature on harm and policing harm has focused, especially in the public health literature, on regulating the harms of police, reducing the iatrogenic harms of police. But we want to move beyond this. Obviously, that's important. But we developed this idea of police as potentially regenerative agents. So it's not enough simply to reduce the harms of policing, but to actually reimagine the police as contributing positively to the resilience of humans and the environments within which they live. So we outline several principles in our paper. The first one is to recognize every person's fragility and vulnerability. And what we say is that a consciousness of interconnection, understanding these connections between different levels and types of harms, recognizes individual fragility and considers humanity's exposure both to everyday health harms and to the harms induced by climate change. And guided by this consciousness, we argue the health of one person is connected to all human health and to the health of the planet, leaving room for growth and coevolution. Within this framework of a consciousness of interconnection, it's important to recognize the limitations and vulnerabilities of the police, both individually and organizationally. Police are also vulnerable, as we elaborate in the paper. They are affected by public health harms and climate harms as well. Our second principle is allow police to generate knowledge to people, knowledge of harms to people and environments. We're inspired very much by the work of David Thatcher here in the United States and in Michigan, who has written extensively on the incredible value of police local knowledge, the experiential knowledge that they have of system failures, institutional failures, the vectors that produce harms, both to humans and the planets that they observe in the course of their everyday work. So what we argue is that police officers can provide crucial evidence of what is happening that is harming environments and people if we really privilege their knowledge, which we have to do. Police possess rich local knowledge of deficits in public health ecosystems, and this knowledge of police should be activated and maintained to allow for human health and flourishing. And if we extend this analysis to climate harms, the regenerative function of policing is pivotal to regulatory networks aimed at reducing global environmental degradation. So police, we argue, could provide input into policy frameworks and laws and ways to frame their potential enforcement in ways that are protective of human and planetary health. We also argue that it is important to generate new assemblages or plural arrangements for aligning public health and public safety promotion. We argue that syndemic assemblages change and morph over time, and that today's harmscapes call for agility in the development of nodal assemblages that address local harmscapes. The first responder assemblages of police and clinicians, for example, that we see in mental health response have developed to mitigate and prevent the harms of mental distress. And I think we need to examine current models that are developing in the regulation of everyday health harms, such as co-responder teams or bringing clinicians into the frontline work with police. We need to figure out what types of arrangements police could help to develop to address climate harms. We also argue for the importance of promoting a minimalist protective role of police. We recognize the iatrogenic, harmful potential of policing, coupled with pressures to extend and blur the police role that have come with these changing harmscapes. But we also argue for a minimalist police role where police focus on their core capacity to protect people from harm, and then encourage other health promotion nodes to do their work. And this links to our argument about police knowledge. Police understand through their extensive local knowledge the types of institutional and social deficits that contribute to harm, so they can provide insights into which institutions, which nodes, which structures can be enlisted to promote community resilience. So in conclusion, we argue that police have first-hand knowledge of the social and institutional failures that create harmscapes, and that protecting humans from harm can only be truly effective if it is linked to the protection of the planet. So the work that has been growing and developing around policing and public health really needs to extend very intentionally to the work on climate harms and to combine all of this together in their thinking. And in summary, we see police as having potential as a regenerative actor. I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jen. Another fascinating talk where you talk about police as both harm interventionists and harm generators, and because of the conflation of harms, the harmscapes, of course, that police have to kind of reimagine their role within assemblages, and of course listing kind of best principles which could go way beyond the criminal justice system focus. And of course principles are important because it's not about the practices. The practices can look different in various contexts. It's about what a regenerative policing principle would look like and how that would translate into other contexts. So thank you so much. It was incredibly interesting, and thank you to both speakers.